Now, for the rest of this newscast, we'll take a look back and further review yesterday's summit with the help of an expert, Dr. Kim Choongsoo from the Korea Institute of Defense Analyses. Dr. Kim, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today again.
My pleasure, thank you.
Now, let's start with the assessment, with your assessment of yesterday's events. It was, of course, a historic day, the first time ever the two leaders of North Korea and the US met. And you were obviously here with us, watching it at Arirang News Studio here. What did you make of it?
Very difficult to define because there are so many different interpretations, so many reading of what happened in Singapore. Particularly, what really troubled me personally was what he spoke during the press conference rather than the joint agreement to the sale. But I think that, first of all, the meeting went pretty well as scheduled, and because he did not respectively leave the space during the meeting. So
I'm guessing you mean Donald Trump.
Yes. The first part, signing a joint agreement, is very important. And even though it's kind of abstract, there are a lot of abstractions. And he said this is a very comprehensive document because it is very difficult to come to very specific terms like a CVID and CVID. We understand that. So overall, it was a very good, successful meeting as the first encounter between the sitting U.S. president and the North Korean leader. So in that particular sense, it was a success. But there was a lot of things to be desired because when it comes to his remarks during the press conference particularly, because there are a lot of things that have not directly related to the CVID or guarantee to North Korea, but rather he spoke about broad regional issues including USFK. So that it was a really troubling kind of spot for us. So I think we expect that we're going to have a much more detailed discussion between the defense ministers and also for the ministers why he made that specific remark during the press conference. But you have to remember, he made that kind of remarks over and over again during his presidential campaign and over and over again. So this is what has been pretty much inscribed in his brain. So the saving a lot of costs, by withdrawing those troops from South Korea and also reducing the size of the massive military drills between the two countries. So that's something we can understand. But at why at this particular point he was referring to this kind of the cancellation of the drills and whatnot, as opposed to kind of the lack of the word we are looking for, as a matter of fact, for long. And this is not what we are looking for because Mr. Trump said, if there is no CVID or CVID, I will not even go to the meeting. But just one day prior to the summit meeting, Mr. Pompeo said the letter V is very important. But now he made a kind of a justification because when he said complete denuclearization, that means once the complete kind of denuclearization starts, it will be verified. So we understand why he made his specific remarks. But after all, as a whole, the meeting went just as planned and pretty well. And even some people are not pretty much happy about this outcome. But this is something we have to work on at the follow-up meetings between the two countries and also some other countries as well, including China as well. Yeah.
I mean, we've got a little bit of time. There's a lot to unpack here, but let's go through things like one by one, if we may. So let's just start along with how they got along. There was a lot of talk about would Trump and Kim get along with their strong personalities clash in some way. But from what we saw, it seemed fairly cordial, but also actually quite guarded. They weren't as warm to each other as they have been with other world leaders. For example, when Kim Jong-un met Moon Jae-in at the Inter-Korean Summit. I mean, what do you think of their body language? How did you assess their meeting and their comments?
I think two leaders made tremendous preparations. What was the first reaction when they met each other? So this is pretty much scheduled and pretty much planned and designed by the two leaders. Of course, Kim Jong-un made a tremendous preparations. What will be the first reaction? What will be the first gesture you'll have? So this is very much according to the plan by his top aide. So they actually begin with a very determined face, and I am sure to make a very big deal. But as the time progresses, they became much more cordial to each other, and finally ended with a very good meeting between the two. And Mr. Trump said, "I can have the touch and feel in a minute." Many people have a doubt whether he really means by that, but I think it turned out that they find. Because we're talking about two different personalities, but they have a lot of commonalities. They're quite unconventional, leaders. So because they know each other's weaknesses and strengths, so they have to, and they decided to get along with each other pretty well, at least on surface, because the show is very important. Okay?
Two clashing personalities perhaps cancel each other out a little bit.
Exactly.
So let's actually go into the result of the summit, which was, of course, the joint statement. Now, opinion is very much divided on the outcome of that. Generally, it seems to be there's more negative than positive assessment of the declaration, especially coming from the U.S. What do you think are those concerns? You've touched a little bit on it, but do you think those concerns are fair?
I think these concerns, particularly among the U.S. analyst community, are very fair and legitimate and right, because the expectations are really, pretty much running high, because the expectation was made by the president himself and his aide. So we are going to put this particular word, like CVID, in any statement, but it was obviously lacking in the statement. So this is a kind of very disappointing event, by the way. So that's why many South Korean and U.S. analysts were kind of disappointed. And I think this is a very legitimate concern and worries, because the reason why this kind of important concepts and concepts are missing in the very important document in the first place. And also, particularly something that they mentioned during the conference was really worrying to many, particularly the South Korean analysts.
But actually, how important is it to have that CVID wording in the declaration? I mean, is it a mistake not having it, or is it actually not that important? Because they do talk about denuclearization in the declaration, but the exact term of complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, does it need to be in there?
That's a very good question, as a matter of fact. I don't think it's a mistake, even though they said we didn't have a time to go over this specific terminology. But I think that tells you how difficult, even though after, like, for 2 months, effort, tremendous efforts by Mike Pompeo and his counterpart, it was very difficult to get to this final definition of terminology, because terminology really matters, even though they have very broad concepts and abstraction and definitions. I think that's why it was very difficult to get down, printed on that particular document. And you can see, as a matter of fact, me personally, looking at this assignment or the joint statement, there should be something that really should be better, because there was I can sense the kind of sense of hurry. This was very hurriedly made at the last minute. So I think it's not a mistake, but this really happens in our actual lives, times, and this is quite often the case. So, but then leaving the room for more to talk between the two leaders and between the ministers and secretaries later on. So we have to wait and see for the follow-up meetings.
How does it compare to previous agreements between the US and North Korea? Because, of course, this isn't the first time. They've talked about denuclearization agreements before. Perhaps there's disappointment because we've been here before and we've seen similar. If it was the first ever agreement between the two, maybe it might have had more impact, do you think?
Because this is very important. We have the Mr. Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un, and finally Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un. Each leader has what they call the crisis, nuclear crisis. In the first nuclear crisis in 1993 to 94, and during the Kim Jong-il reign, he also had we call the second, North Korean nuclear crisis. And this might be termed as a third crisis during the Kim Jong-un reign. So the crisis produced a kind of agreement between the two, in the United States and North Korea. For example, like the so-called general, this is a very important Geneva Agreement framework, 1994. But it turned out to be because there was kind of expectation the North Korean regime might collapse anytime soon, and the Congress was not willing to pay funding all these two LWRs and money. So it just failed. So this is not just one-sided mistake, because we don't know what's going on, as a matter of fact, on the other side of the DMZ. So that we had two terrible, very unhappy lessons. That's why Mr. Trump didn't really want to repeat this mistake again and again. It is very good, but as people are beginning to say, oh, we're going to have another failing kind of agreements, because the task is too big, too important. So that's why Mr. Trump has really introduced a very different, very creative idea to solve these problems, unlike his predecessors, because during his predecessor, all these two important documents, as a matter of fact, have failed. So he's looking for a kind of new kind of outbreak that we're going to see a real successful agreement between the two countries. that will guarantee the CVID and also CVIZ. So that's the starting point for these two leaders to work on this very specific agreement, even though I don't know whether it's going to call the Panmunjom agreement or Singapore agreement rather.
Yeah.
So, but the details will be worked out, hammered out by his aides.
If we look at the final detail in the declaration that they point out, it's about the bringing back the remains of the U.S. prisoners of war and MIA soldiers missing in action.
That's right.
What do you make of this inclusion? It was very much we didn't expect something like that to be included in the declaration, did we?
Oh, actually, I personally, to be honest with you, I was expecting this point because it's very important for the American voters. United States is a voluntary forces, and as the supreme commander of the U.S. Armed Forces, the president should be very concerned about the life and well-being of the soldiers. So that's why POWMID is very important, and it's been around for the last 20 years, as a matter of fact. So we have learned, South Korean MND had learned a lot of lessons because we sent our officials and experts, including myself, to Hawaii, for example. At the time, there was a kind of office called a SEAL-HI. I know it changed its name, but the full accounting of the soldiers missing in the actions and the killed and POW is very important for U.S. voters. So that's why this is a very emotional issue. And this is something we cannot understand easily, our South Koreans. But I think this is a very important connecting point with the United States and North Korea, and also Chinese as well, because there's a lot of Chinese soldiers who were killed during the Korean War. So for example, like the Chosin Reservoir, for example, millions of thousands of tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides were killed. So there will be a very important international investigation into the POWs, MIDs in that particular area in North Korea. So that's going to be a very important start connecting U.S., North Korea, and even the Chinese.
So I guess appealing to very much the U.S. voters in America.
That's right, and also to the North Koreans and Chinese as well.
Of course. That was one of the concessions that was made, but then later Trump also revealed in his press conference that another concession that the North Koreans made was the giving up of the dismantling of the nuclear missile engine test site. That was, of course, not included in the declaration, but he said that was something that they decided last minute, just off the cuff. What do we know about this test site, and actually how much impact does it have on the North Korean nuclear program? How important is it?
Because it is very important, as a very important political gesture by the North Korean leadership, because when you talk about the CVID for the American, U.S. citizens particularly, because it is the most important thing is to see the missiles, particularly ICBMs, not just bombs, because without the deliverments, bombs are not just it's useless. So you have to have a very durable, very strong, very sophisticated means of delivery, reaching more over 10,000 kilometers, 13,000 kilometers. So this is the first initial very important sign of North Korea's readiness we are really eager to go for the CVID. So this is very symbolic, but that's why Mr. Trump quoted, this is the things that, even though it was not contained in the agreement, it was something that I got during the conference. Very important first step as a sign of CVID. Okay.
One of the most controversial points that also came out of that press conference is Trump revealing that he promised to stop joint military drills with South Korea. How important are these joint drills actually, and does it affect the defense readiness and security of South Korea? And actually, one more point, Trump also mentioned that it will save the US a lot of money. Will it?
That's right. Again, this is a point he has made over and over again during his presidential campaign, and he made it some other time as well. I think what he really sees is the saving the money, because this is we are running a lot of huge deficit with many allies, as he said in G7. So saving the money and bringing their soldiers back home is something that, as the Supreme Commander of the U.S. Armed Forces, is very important. And as a matter of fact, there are a lot of American voters who really want to reduce the military presence on the Korean Peninsula. But among the really military officials and experts, it is not in our best interest to maintain a certain level of U.S. troops. And one thing that he actually made a big mistake, he was referring to 32,000, and at one point he mentioned 42,000, which is wrong. The end strength of the U.S. military presence is 28,500. And sometimes because of the management, we call it force management, there are different number of U.S. troops stationed on the peninsula. So I think what he was trying to get is to reduce the money, tax money, U.S. tax money, and also get the more contribution by the Korean government. But I think the timing was not good, and this is maybe misleading, giving misleading kind of information or sign to North Korea and to China as well, because the United States is ready to cancel all these important meetings, because it was not the North Koreans themselves, but also Chinese were increasingly concerned and worried about. They did not hide their concern and worry. Whenever we had the strategic bombers and aircraft carriers on and off the Korean Peninsula, they were really, the first reaction was the North Koreans and the Chinese. So this is a kind of concession because they actually looking for kind of the way to guarantee this regime's stability. So I think this is a tremendous concession from the U.S. side, even though.
I mean, we're starting to run out of time here, but there's still so much to talk about. Actually, but at one point, one of the last questions I want to ask you is actually, we've talked a little bit about the disappointments of this declaration. But on the other side, the flip side, there are some who are saying that actually this is better right now than the situation was 6 months ago. At least there's peace, at least there's good relations, and there's no threat of war, especially of nuclear war. Should we consider this as a win, as a small step to a longer, brighter future where we can have better engagement with North Korea, and hopefully that can help the North Korean people as well?
I agree with the letter. The letter is right, because this is a very important step to a brighter future for the North Korean residents, and also the brighter and better relations, special relations between the United States and the DPRK, and also with South Korea as well. But I think this is maybe this is maybe misleading because this is something that should be discussed among U.S. and South Korea, two important allies, not with North Korea, because otherwise this might be just a kind of concession on its part. But North Korea will ask more and more concessions without giving any assurance about their CVID. So this is the problem we are worried about, both in Seoul and Washington.
Well, thank you for your time, Doctor. And as always, we appreciate your insights. And it's been a very special couple of days where I'm sharing this historic moment with you as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.